There are many things I love to do while in Japan, but one thing's for sure. Whether I've spent the day climbing a mountain or relaxing at a supercento, at some point I'll always find a moment to enjoy a glass of sake. This humble beverage has been brewed in Japan for more than 2,000 years and is an inextricable thread in the nation's cultural tapestry. It's also utterly delicious and exciting to explore, so here's my guide covering why you should pay attention to sake. Westerners generally run into sake in a couple of ways. One classic introduction is drinking low-quality table sake, possibly heated, during a Japanese meal and being either underwhelmed or whacked over the head with ethanol. At the opposite end of the spectrum, many people are told that true sake is super premium sake, with their first taste being an expensive daiginjo that is likely delicate and floral with notes of melon, banana and other fruits, but comes with a cost that makes it prohibitive to drink outside very special occasions. Both impressions are valid, obviously, but the first crucial point I want to make is that there is an absolutely massively wide world in between. To put it simply, sake, or Nihonshu to be more accurate, is as broad in its flavours and aromas as any other style of alcohol you might be into. It very much has something for almost everyone. Sake runs the gamut from clean, crisp and dry, through to complex, lingering and luxurious. From delicately aromatic with floral, fruity notes, through to rough and ready umami bombs. Some sakes are intensely sour, some have an assertive mineral backbone, others are creamy or woody or herbal or zesty or sweet. One moment you're drinking something that requires contemplation to appreciate its subtle depths. The next you're being assaulted with flavour, yet in both cases there's balance and purpose. On top of this, sake has a secret weapon, versatility. It pairs extremely well with a wide variety of cuisines and is able to be enjoyed at a wide range of temperatures, tasting different at each. Some of the best sakes change almost magically depending on the serving temperature, going from, say, sour cherry with a pronounced minerality at room temperature to a wonderfully rich and rounded sweetness with an aroma like freshly baked cookies when heated. There's no one temperature to warm sake to either, and the Japanese have a host of names for different temperatures. Typically, the brewery will recommend a specific temperature, but to really see how Nihonshu changes, I like to heat a new sake up to 55 degrees Celsius, or tobikirikan, and then sip it as it gradually slides back down towards room temperature, discovering the point at which I enjoy it the most along the way. Regardless of the temperature you drink it at, one of the most appealing things about sake is its lush texture. Sake is often gloriously smooth on the palate, whether it's light and crisp or rich and full. Low acidity compared to wine helps drive this, and is also one of the reasons sake pairs incredibly well with a wide range of foods.
Kanpai!
That said, there are now plenty of new school sakes that drive the acidity up to give the drink a little more zip. Sparkling sake is also a category that's gaining some momentum.
Le deuxième nez, après aération, lui, développe quand même ce côté un petit peu craie, la craie qu'on retrouve en deuxième nez.
While most sake is drunk relatively young and fresh, it can also benefit, or at least change in interesting ways, if you cellar it. Known as koshu, aged sake takes on more and more of a caramel hue as it matures and the flavour intensifies. With so many ways to enjoy it and so many flavour profiles to explore, it's quite incredible that sake is made with only a handful of ingredients. So-called premium sake can legally only be made using rice, water, koji, yeast, lactic acid, and optionally a small quantity of brewer's alcohol. That lean list of ingredients, however, belies a complicated production process. Yes, sake is a fermented beverage like wine or beer, but whereas wine is a simple fermentation where you turn the glucose in grapes into alcohol, and beer is a process of sequential fermentation because you need to break down the starch in grains like barley before you can start the fermentation, sake making uses multiple parallel fermentation. In this type of ferment, the rice's starch is being broken down at the same time as the yeast is turning any available sugars into alcohol. This means a delicate equilibrium must be maintained so that the koji, a mold that's the engine behind sake, miso, and soy sauce, is breaking down the rice and creating sugars fast enough for the yeast to have food to fuel it, but not so fast that the yeast is stressed. Of course, the actual fermentation is just one aspect of sake production. I'm not going to go through the whole process, but I think it'll be helpful to touch on each of the ingredients in turn. First up is water. Sake breweries live or die based on the quality of their local water supply, and there are water sources so famous, such as Miyamizu in Nara,
宮水それは日本一の酒どころ灘5号を支える命の水なのです
that brands are built around them and they're known throughout Japan. Historically, breweries were drawn to locations with great water for brewing, and they also adapted their brewing techniques to suit the water they had to hand. In general, Japan has pretty soft water, which means low minerality, and this is good for the low and slow approach modern breweries take for making premium sake. There are some regions with harder water, such as, again, Nara, and while this is ideal for yeast growth and promotes a vigorous fermentation, it also naturally changes the character of the final product, and is in part responsible for the development of regional styles. The rice a brewery chooses to use and how much it's milled is another hugely important factor in sake making. There are a host of different rice varieties used specifically for sake, ranging from modern super strains like Yamada Nishiki, the king of sake rice, to more difficult to work with heirloom varieties like Omachi. Each contributes subtle differences in the end result's flavour profile. There are a few things that make a rice variety particularly well suited to sake, but one of them is having a defined starch core at its centre. Sake rice is almost always polished with sophisticated milling machines that can remove the exterior of the grain so that only the starch core remains. The idea is that the proteins and lipids that are outside the core contribute to off flavours, and this is why the most premium sakes, in inverted commas, use rice where literally 50% or more of the grain has been polished away, leaving just the starch behind. While it's true that these sakes can be very refined and delicate in flavour, more robust sakes may want the umami and bitterness that can come from less polished rice. So just because something uses more highly polished rice doesn't make it better. Your taste should determine whether something is good or not, and the increased complexity from less polished rice can definitely be a good thing. The next ingredient is lactic acid, and in most modern sakes, this is manually added to the yeast starter, which is known as shubo or moto in Japanese. The lactic acid's role is to help create an ideal environment for the yeast to flourish while killing off other unwanted microbes. This method is called sokujo, but is by no means the only option. Many breweries use older techniques such as Yamahai and Kimoto, where they allow a lactic environment to form naturally, before then moving on to begin the fermentation. These methods typically add an extra couple of weeks to the overall production process, and the resulting sakes often have more complexity and funky characteristics. Of all the raw ingredients, the choice of yeast will arguably have the greatest impact on the final product. Sake yeasts impact flavour, aroma, acidity, and attenuation. Modern breweries have a wide array of options at their fingertips, from old school strains that create earthy, robust flavours, through to extremely modern yeasts chosen specifically for their ability to create fruity, floral, and highly aromatic Nihonshu. Not all breweries work with cultured yeasts, however. Others allow wild strains present in the brewery itself to fall into the tank, sparking spontaneous natural fermentation. Kinoshita Shuzo's famous Tamagawa brand has many excellent examples of this, and these sakes tend to be complicated, interesting, and delicious. The final ingredient we're going to touch on is brewer's alcohol, and for premium sakes, adding this is very much a choice the brewer can make depending on what he or she is going for. In this instance, distilled alcohol is added not to increase yield or shelf stability, as it often is in futsushu or table sake, but to heighten aromas, achieve a lighter body, and create a smoother mouthfeel. In terms of process, the brewer's alcohol is added after fermentation but before pressing to help extract more flavour and aroma compounds out of the sake lees in the tank. For a sake to be classified as premium, known as special designation sake or tokubetsu shoshu in Japan, the ingredients we just ran through are the only ingredients allowed, and there are further restrictions too. Special designation brews must also use rice of a certain grade, contain a ratio of koji rice to regular rice of 15% or more, and adhere to intensive production methods designed to ensure the highest quality end product. Sake within this designation is further categorized based largely on the polishing rate of the rice and whether or not distilled alcohol has been added. Ginjo uses rice that has been milled to 60% or less of its original size, while daiginjo uses rice that has been milled to 50% or less. If there's a junmai on the front of either of these, then you'll know that no brewer's alcohol has been added. If not, a small amount, less than 10% of the weight of the white rice, has gone into the final product. A quick aside before we move on. Junmai is very much in vogue at the moment, but contrary to what some might say, it is not a more pure version of sake. Aruten, sake with alcohol added, has an extremely long history, and some of the best sake in the world is made this way. As always, drink what you like, not what you're told is the best. Continuing on, there's honjozo, which means original production method, and uses all the same core ingredients with rice polished to 70% or less. There's also tokubetsu honjozo, a special version of honjozo, which either has rice milled to 60% or less or utilizes special production methods. Alongside these are the standalone classifications junmai and tokubetsu junmai, which parallel the rules for honjozo and tokubetsu honjozo, but without brewer's alcohol. So that's special designation sake. What about outside that? Well, sake that doesn't fit into any of the categories we just ran through is known as futsushu, or regular sake. The ingredients that can be used here are loosened up a bit to also include additives like sweeteners and acidulants. A higher percentage of distilled alcohol is also allowed in the final product. These are typically the cheapest sakes available in Japan, but just because something is categorized as futsushu doesn't make it bad. There's plenty of great stuff in every category. Another aspect of understanding sake is learning a little more about the many production decisions that brewers can make to drastically impact the character of the final drink. I've already mentioned yamahai and kimoto, but let's run through a few other important words you may like to learn. The first is nigori, which is a cloudy style of sake that still has rice solids in solution. These are generally on the sweeter side with a creamy mouthfeel. Nigori is not to be confused with doburoku, by the way, which is a traditional Japanese homebrew that you'll typically find in Shinto shrines and venues that don't have a license to brew sake. While it's also cloudy, it hasn't been filtered at all, so is often very thick and chunky. Nigori, meanwhile, like all sake, has been strained, just with a more porous cloth than normal to allow tiny rice particles through. Another useful word to know is nama, which means raw or fresh in Japanese, and is the name given to unpasteurized sake. Sake is typically pasteurized twice, once after filtering but before maturation, and once before bottling. Namasakes, or namazake, tend to be fruitier and livelier than their pasteurized cousins, with some light activity still taking place in the bottle that can sometimes give them extra zip on the palate and allows them to change a little over time. Namasakes are best kept in the fridge, and it's generally recommended to drink them within a couple of weeks of opening. If a sake is genshu, meanwhile, it hasn't been diluted. This doesn't necessarily mean that it will be markedly stronger than the usual 14 to 15% ABV, but it often does. 22% is the upper limit of sake's legal classification, by the way. Then there are different seasonal releases to be aware of. If you see shiboritate on a label, that's sake that's been freshly pressed and immediately released, so it may be a little on the greener, livelier side. Hiya oroshi, meanwhile, is sake that was made during winter, matured over summer, then released in autumn. And those are just two. Putting aside all that terminology, the key thing is to try lots of different styles and drink what you enjoy. Don't get hung up on classifications, because if you only drink highly milled, delicate daiginjos, you're closing yourself off to some of the most interesting sakes on the market. Aromatic and refined can be delicious, sure, but so too can punchy, rustic numbers. Nihonshu is obviously a significant component of Japan's national heritage, and alongside shochu and awamori, is one of the island nation's only native alcohol traditions. Many breweries have been around for hundreds of years, and modern sake is the result of countless advances in technology and in technique, from more and more effective milling processes and the shift to fermenting for longer at lower temperatures, through to breeding easier to use rice and the development of ever more aromatic yeast strains. Master brewers, aka tojis, have been passing down hard-won knowledge and expertise for generation upon generation. Brewing high-quality sake is not simple. It's a tightrope that must be walked, where skill, experience, and intuition are vital. The brewing process is laborious, painstaking, and time-intensive. Sake is an artisanal product and deeply intentional. Different toji could have the same water source, the same rice from the same harvest milled to the same level, the same koji and the same yeast, and still come up with sake with completely different characters based on not just how they decided to brew on a macro level, but the many small decisions they made along the way. As a cultural export, sake is very much on the ascendency outside Japan. The newly converted appreciate the artisanal approach to the brewing process and just how much care and attention has been put into every batch. It's no wonder there are more and more importers bringing it into countries around the world, which then leads to sake bars popping up and more restaurants having a decent selection to offer. Inside Japan, however, the domestic market for sake has been in decline for a full 50 years. There are a number of reasons why, but one is simply that other drinks, beer, wine, spirits, have come in and taken market share, appealing to the population as sexy alternatives to the tried and true. Where once there were many thousands of breweries across Japan, now that number is closer to an even thousand. Even so, there's still an incredible amount of fantastic sake being made, whether by tiny microbreweries or giant enterprises working at an industrial scale in famous brewing regions like Nara, Fushimi, or Saijo. It's also ridiculously affordable in Japan, so on your next trip, don't hesitate to seek out some sake bars and bottle shops and ask for recommendations. Speaking of which, here are a few brands I love that you can look out for. Kaze no Mori. These nama numbers tend to be super bright but with plenty of depth, and often have a slight effervescence. The Omachi 807 is to die for. Tamagawa. Many of these brews are made using spontaneous fermentation and are rich and complicated. Kamo Nishiki. These small batch namazakes are labelled according to the tank they're in. They're always lively and fruity with a lush mouthfeel. Finally, a recommendation that should be relatively easy to find when you're in Japan, Kenbishi's Kuromatsu. This table sake comes from one of the biggest sake breweries in Japan, but despite its size, Kenbishi maintains a labour-intensive artisanal approach to its range. This tasty tipple costs next to nothing, but is made by blending several sakes that have been aged for up to 4 years to create a drink that is umami-laden and silky smooth. It tastes great at a variety of temperatures too. So that's my overview of the wonderful world of Nihonshu. Do you already have a favourite sake? Let me know in the comments. Please also like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching and kanpai!